if I had to choose between life or death, I'm going to choose life, and I'm going to choose life 300%. When I think of pessimism, it's paralyzing. It stops you from, at least in my case, I don't know about you, but in my case, it stops me from creating. It makes me less likable and harder to be around people I live with, people I talk to on a daily basis. But if you think of every decision you make as a decision between heaven and hell, I want to make the heavenly decision, where everything is at least slightly better. I like how JBP puts it. It's like, imagine your father dies. You could either make the choice of grieving together and being one as a family, attempting to move on from the death properly, or you can have an argument about who gets the leftovers of whatever money he left behind. And that argument over his corpse would be, like, metaphorically hell. And I always think of my life in that. Like, I can make the choice that makes my life more hell, or I can make the choice that makes my life more heaven. You know?
Dude, no, I get what you're saying. I basically agree with you. I just think I put it in different words and for a completely different perspective. My view of it is everything I've said, including the statement of I think it averages out to 70% suffering, 30% pleasure, even if you view it a bit differently, I hold that to just be realistic. Like, that's just looking at the reality of the situation, looking at all the suffering in the world, and acknowledging it there, but also not overemphasizing the suffering and looking at the pleasure and looking at that too, and just trying to find an actual balance of it. My perspective, I just feel like I'm being realistic, and by acknowledging the realism of it, it's just all hilarious. It's kind of funny. You talk about getting really cynical, like it depresses you, it ruins the vibe and everything. That's not how I see it at all. Like the best comedians, like, they show how absurd everything is, and they're hilarious while doing it. Why? Because they're being realistic. They're showing how absurd of the clown show this existence is. And that's how I see it. This existence is a clown show. You could whine over the suffering in it, or you could wallow in it, but I mean, what is that going to do? At a certain point, just acknowledge it for what it is, and it kind of becomes funny in a way.
This is not you, but I used to live with a guy who was very, very cynical. He actually had an IQ of like 142. And I grew up with this dude, but he never made any effort in his life. He was obese, hated everybody, but he was hilarious. Always had the right comeback at a given moment, and he was well-read. A little too atheistic for my tastes, but when I was younger, I thought he was cool because I got to, experience somebody of such a profundity at a young age. But as I've gotten older, living in these different countries, meeting like hundreds of different people and gaining wisdom from multiple perspectives, I look back in that guy who never really did anything with his life and instead chose to just be like a computer dude hanging out on Reddit all day. Like, that's just maybe this is all a clown show, but you have to exist. Unless you can kill yourself, but otherwise you're here.
We might still exist afterwards.
You might still exist afterwards. That's a different conversation. There can be no waste, and even if this is a clown show, fuck it. That's their clown show. My life is my life, and I don't want my life to be a clown show. I can laugh at it. I can make jokes. I can find people who are not interested in that clown show and create my own community of folks who will want to enjoy what we have in the now. And I have this dream of always being around people like that. And there's a way to deal with that suffering, I guess. And I just get the impression that you're okay with it, and I suck at being okay with it.
Here's the thing. I'm not saying to laugh at how shitty your own life is. I'm not saying to think everything is shitty and hilarious and just to be okay with your own life being shitty and therefore hilarious. What I just mean is that objectively, life is pretty shitty. You get any point, you just develop cancer out of nowhere. Or you have a kid and he has horrible Down syndrome. Or you'd even have a kid, and then 5 years later, he has cancer of the eyes, and then, die. All sorts of horrible shit, could just happen at any point. It's random. And the more I think about it, the more I just realize, you can't even mitigate all of it, because there's just so much unknown variables of horrible shit to happen, that even if you theoretically take every precaution there's never enough precautions. There's always something, some unknown variable that could get you, theoretically. If you want to play the paranoid, you could do that, and it would still get you. There would be something that could get you. There are unknown variables for misery out there. But, most people aren't getting hit by those. Most people are managing to do just fine. It could happen at any point, but for the most part, it's not happening to most people. Be grateful for that. But know that it can happen. Like, because I think it cheapens your own appreciation if you deny instead of accept how bad things can be. I guess that's really what I'm saying, is that you value appreciating things more when you acknowledge rather than deny how bad things could otherwise be.
Yes. It sounds like we agree on the fundamentals of this conversation. We're just approaching it from different perspectives.
Well, that's what I said earlier, yeah.
No. And it's enlightening. I mean, I guess, like, has anyone in your life ever died? Like not a family member. Everyone's had a family member who's died. Have you ever had, like, a friend about in a similar age who's died? Never had a friend?
No.
Like, when I was 18, my best friend died. And have I ever told you about my friend Kurt? I know I have to have told you about it.
It's possible, but I don't remember the details.
Okay, so Kurt was a little bit older than me, but I used to have a lot of problems with my father. My dad and I are really great now, but, like, I had a rough spot when I was, like, younger, and Kurt was about 10, 15 years older than me. And he was like a big brother figure in my life. And we used to go out eating together. He had a farm, and we used to, like, cut off chicken heads and, like, cook food, and, like, all sorts of, like, rites of passages, like, that I experienced were when I was with him. Like, you're talking about suffering and all this shit, all these things that could happen at a moment's notice. Well, when I was 18, I woke up on the morning of my high school graduation to the news from my mother that he had been shot in the street in a bad part of town. 2 shots in the back, and he died in the street. And his friend AJ said that he watched from the attic of the house that he was living and saw Kurt bleed out. And that was my high school graduation, and that was, like, one of the most difficult moments in my entire life, because somebody who had shown me how to live life and, be more resilient, kill chickens and go exploring in the woods, all sorts of things. He disappeared at a moment's notice. That was a shock to the system that took me a long time to get over, and I still think about him probably at least, like, once a week. But even so, I take this perspective where all those shitty things that can happen to you, like, life is like, fuck you. And my perspective is like, well, fuck you, life. I'm going to continue chugging along. Go fuck yourself. I can get cancer. If I get cancer tomorrow, I'm not going to be happy. It would suck. And it's a lot easier for me to say this now as a person who doesn't have cancer. But knowing myself, at the very least, I would want my final 6 months to be lived to the absolute fullest, because I see this complacence in saying that life will throw all this shit at you and you can never expect what's going to happen, as this thing, like, you are, it sounds so much like giving up the potential that you have, because this life is shitty, it's suffering, and I'm not even gonna. It's very Schopenhauer-esque what you're describing, and I was Schopenhauer-esque for a long time, but I don't know, man. It sounds like a path to denying what your life could be. This suffering, like, and I'm like, fuck life, in the sense that it's suffering. I don't care if it's suffering. I'm going to chug along through, and if I die in a fucking atomic blast in the end, to me, that's what's worth it. Am I right? I don't know. I'm just expressing my own individuality, but that's very meaningful to me.
I mean, look, the emotional fault that a lot of pessimists make, in my view, is, like I said, 70-30. 70 bad, 30 good. But pessimists look at that 70, and, okay, I'll agree, astutely, they say that's the majority. Where they go wrong is they turn 70 into 95% somehow. Like, they overemphasize the 70. And don't get me wrong, 70 is a lot higher than 30. But, 30 is a good enough odd where if I'm feeling lucky that day, I might make a gamble on 30%. What I'm just saying is that 30% is not an insignificant number. And pessimists have a tendency to turn that 70. Again, that's just my up my ass number I came up with. But they have a tendency to turn that 70% into... They turn it into 100%. They're like, here's 70%. No, it's 100% bad. 30% is actually a significant good number. It's nowhere near ideal. 30% is enough room for various good things to consistently happen.